The morning sun cut through the dusty Texas air at Fort Hood, turning the base into a shimmering mirage of concrete and steel. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the Flight Operations building, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. She wasn't drinking it anymore. She was just holding it because her hands needed something to do. Around her, pilots came and went. Most of them barely glanced at her. That was fine. Sarah had gotten used to not being seen, even when she was standing right in front of people. She had been at Fort Hood for 3 years, and in those 3 years she had never once been given the chance to fly an Apache. Not once. She had flown every other helicopter the Army owned. She had logged nearly 4,000 flight hours. She held a perfect safety record. Her performance reviews were excellent, the kind that usually led to promotions and opportunities. But the Apache, that bird was reserved for the men. No one had ever said it out loud, not officially, but everyone understood the unspoken rule. Sarah set down her cold coffee and looked out the window at the flight line. 2 Apache helicopters sat in the morning light, their rotors still, their weapons systems loaded and ready. They were magnificent machines, 95 feet from blade tip to tail boom, enough firepower to level a city block, the most sophisticated attack helicopter in the world, and the most exclusive. Still dreaming about the big toys, Sarah turned to see Lieutenant Marcus Webb standing behind her. Marcus was younger than her by about 5 years, but he already had more Apache flight time than Sarah had hours in any other aircraft. He was smiling, but there was something mean in the smile. "Just thinking about the schedule," Sarah said quietly. "Yeah, well, don't think too hard," Marcus said, walking past her to the equipment room. "The Apache isn't really a woman's machine, nothing personal, it's just a fact." Sarah had heard versions of this so many times that the words barely registered anymore. But they always landed the same way, like a punch that you see coming but can't quite dodge. Her commanding officer, Colonel Richard Hartley, had made his position clear when she first arrived. He was a man in his late 50s who had spent his entire career in the Apache community. He saw the helicopter the way some men see sports cars or motorcycles, as the ultimate expression of power and control. "You're a fine pilot, Captain Chen," he had told her during her first week. "I've read your file, but the Apache requires a certain kind of mindset, a certain kind of killer instinct. It's not about skill or hours logged. It's about something deeper. It's about being born to do this." What he meant was that it wasn't for her. Sarah had swallowed that rejection and tried not to let it show. She had been raised to be tough. Her father, Thomas Chen, had been a Navy pilot himself. He had flown F-18s during the First Gulf War, and he had come home with stories and scars and a particular kind of pride that only came from knowing you had been the best at something that mattered. Sarah had inherited his discipline and his drive, but she had also inherited his realism. She knew that the world didn't always reward merit. She knew that being right wasn't the same as being heard. And she knew that fighting every battle took energy that you might need for the wars that actually mattered. So she had made a choice. She would be patient. She would be professional. She would keep her head down and do her job with excellence, and eventually someone would notice. Eventually the system would recognize what she could do. That day hadn't come yet. Today was Thursday, October 12th. Sarah had been awake since 4 in the morning, which was normal for her. She had run 5 miles, which was normal. She had eaten a plain chicken breast and brown rice for breakfast, which was normal. Everything about her life was normal and controlled and carefully managed. Then at 10:30 in the morning, she got a call from Major James Richardson. "Captain Chen, this is Major Richardson from Command Headquarters. I'm calling to ask if you'd be interested in a special assignment." Sarah's heart had jumped. After 3 years, finally someone from higher up had noticed her. "Yes, sir, absolutely." "Good, we're hosting a demonstration flight next week. The Army's considering some new training protocols, and we want to show the capabilities of our current fleet. We need 1 pilot from each helicopter class, Blackhawk, Chinook, Apache, the whole family. I'm looking at your file, and I see you've got solid hours in everything except the Apache. Colonel Hartley mentioned you might be interested in that position." Sarah's throat went dry. Had Colonel Hartley actually said that? She doubted it. But it didn't matter, the door was open. "I'm very interested, sir." "Excellent. Now I should tell you, there will be some high-ranking observers at this demonstration. We're going to have an Admiral down here from Washington. He's making a tour of bases across the country, assessing our readiness. This is a good opportunity to show him what we've got. I'm going to need the best pilots in each category. Are you one of the best, Captain? It was a simple question, but it required an honest answer. Yes, sir, I am. All right, get your training hours in this week. I'll talk to Colonel Hartley about getting you seat time in the Apache. The demonstration is Friday, October 19th. I'll email you the full briefing. When Sarah hung up the phone, her hands were shaking. 1 week, that's all she had. 1 week to prove that she belonged in that cockpit. 1 week to show Colonel Hartley and Marcus Webb and everyone else who had ever doubted her that they had been wrong. She had no idea that 1 week was also going to be the longest and most painful 7 days of her life. That afternoon, Sarah walked into Colonel Hartley's office. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't schedule an appointment. She simply knocked on the door and waited for him to look up from his desk. Colonel Hartley was a big man with gray hair and a face that had been weathered by thousands of hours under an open sky. He looked up at her with mild annoyance, the way you look at someone who has interrupted something important. Captain Chen, what can I do for you? Sir, I just received a call from Major Richardson in command. He's asking me to fly an Apache during the demonstration next Friday. I understand that I'll need training hours to be flight ready. I'm requesting permission to begin that training immediately. Colonel Hartley leaned back in his chair. There was a long silence. I see. And did Major Richardson happen to mention that the Apache requires a specific certification process? That you can't just jump into the seat after a week of training? No, sir, but I'm a quick learner. I can compress the training cycle. Captain, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but frankly, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Sarah felt something crystallize inside her chest. It was a cold, hard thing. It was resolve. With respect, sir, Major Richardson called me personally. He's expecting me to be ready. Major Richardson is a good officer, but he doesn't understand the Apache community the way I do. And he doesn't know you the way I do. Flying that helicopter isn't just about technique. It's about instinct. It's about aggression. The Apache is a beast, Captain. It takes a certain kind of person to master it. Am I not capable? Colonel Hartley met her eyes. For a moment he looked almost sorry. I don't think you are, no, but I'm not going to tell you that you can't try. I'll get you a trainer. But understand something, if you fail, if you wash out, Major Richardson is going to look bad. So is the base, and so will you. This isn't a game, Captain, this is your career. I understand, sir. Do you? Because I've been doing this for 30 years and I've seen a lot of pilots, real pilots, and I've seen plenty of people who think they belong in a cockpit because they've been successful at other things. Success doesn't transfer to the Apache. The Apache doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care about your ego. It only cares about whether you have what it takes. Sarah said nothing. She simply stood there and absorbed every word, every doubt, every prediction of failure. Dismissed, Captain. As Sarah turned to leave, Colonel Hartley called out one more thing. Your trainer will be Captain Webb. He's the best pilot we have. If you're going to get up to speed in a week, it's going to be because of him. Make sure you appreciate that. Sarah nodded and left without responding. But as she walked back to her office, she thought about what Colonel Hartley had said. The Apache was a beast. It took a certain kind of person. Well, Sarah thought, maybe she was that person. Maybe she had always been that person. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to prove it. The clock was ticking. She had 6 days left. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment in Killeen, Texas, staring at the Apache manual. She had printed out 200 pages of technical specifications and performance data. She had diagrams of the weapons systems. She had flight profiles and emergency procedures and 1,000 other details that needed to be committed to memory. Most pilots took months to get certified in the Apache. Good pilots took 3 months. Exceptional pilots could do it in 6 weeks. Sarah was trying to do it in 1 week, while also working her normal job and maintaining the physical and mental discipline that her life required. It was impossible. But impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been done yet. Sarah opened her laptop and began to read. She read through the night. At 3 in the morning, she was still reading. At 5, she took a 2-hour break for sleep. At 7, she was back at it. By the time she had to report to the flight line, she had absorbed more information about the Apache than most pilots learned in their first 3 weeks. Captain Marcus Webb was waiting for her at the helicopter when she arrived. So you're really going to do this? he said, looking at her with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. Sarah couldn't quite tell. "I'm going to try," Sarah said. "Well, good luck, you're going to need it. The Apache is unforgiving. One mistake and you're dead. It happens fast." "I understand." Do you really understand what it's like to be at the edge of what you're capable of? To feel the machine responding to your inputs, pushing back, demanding everything you have. Most people can't handle that. They freeze. They lose their nerve. The Apache kills the people who lose their nerve. Sarah looked at Marcus. He was trying to intimidate her. Maybe he meant it, and maybe he was just protecting his territory. Either way, she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of doubt. "Let's get to work," she said. The first flight was a disaster. Not a spectacular disaster. Not the kind where alarms start blaring and you have to make an emergency landing. It was worse than that. It was the quiet kind of disaster where you realize how much you don't know, where every input feels too large or too small, where the machine fights you at every turn and you realize that 3,000 hours of flying other helicopters has not prepared you for this one. The Apache's control system was different from anything else Sarah had flown. It was faster, more responsive, more sensitive to small movements. Flying it was like switching from a truck to a sports car. The same basic principles applied, but the degree of difficulty had jumped into a different category altogether. Marcus sat in the instructor's seat, watching her with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Feel how the nose wants to drift left," he said. "You're not correcting fast enough. It's not in Blackhawk, Captain. You can't be gentle with this machine." For the next 2 hours, Sarah fought the Apache, and the Apache won. By the time they landed, her hands were aching, her shoulders were tight, and her confidence had taken a serious hit. But she didn't say anything. She simply got out of the cockpit, thanked Marcus for the instruction, and walked back to the operations office. That night, she called her father. "How's the Army treating you, Sarah?" her father said when he heard her voice. "I got the chance to fly the Apache," she said. "There's a demonstration next Friday. I need to be ready." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's wonderful, honey. How much training do you have?" 1 week. 1 week, Sarah, that's. "I know it's fast, but I can do this. I know I can. I just need to remember some things about myself that I've forgotten." "What do you mean?" Sarah looked out the window of her apartment at the lights of Killeen, spreading out across the Texas darkness. "I mean that I've been playing it safe for a long time. I've been waiting for permission. I've been accepting the limits that other people put on me, and it hasn't worked. So I'm done with that. Starting now, I'm only going to accept limits that I put on myself." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother used to say something like that," he said finally. "She said that the only person who could ever really hold her back was herself." "Mom was smart." "She was, and so are you. Go show them what you can do, Sarah. Show them what a real pilot looks like." The week passed in a blur of training flights and late nights studying. Sarah flew with Marcus every morning. Every afternoon she studied systems. Every night she visualized flying, walking through the procedures in her mind over and over again. By Wednesday, something shifted. The Apache stopped fighting her, or maybe she stopped fighting the Apache. They found a rhythm together. Marcus noticed it too. "You're getting better," he said after the morning flight on Thursday. "You've got decent instincts for this, natural hands." It was the closest thing to a compliment that Sarah had heard from him. She didn't smile, but something inside her did. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. The Admiral from Washington was somewhere on the base. Sarah didn't know where yet. She had one more training flight scheduled, and then the demonstration would be tomorrow. Sarah was 10 minutes away from her last training flight when Colonel Hartley's adjutant found her on the flight line. "Captain Chen," the young lieutenant said, slightly out of breath, "Colonel Hartley wants to see you right now." Sarah's stomach tightened. In the military, when someone says they want to see you right now, it usually means something has gone wrong. She followed the lieutenant back to the headquarters building, her mind racing through possibilities. Had someone complained? Had Marcus said something? Had her request to fly the Apache created some kind of political problem that she didn't understand? Colonel Hartley's office felt smaller than it had before. Or maybe Sarah just felt smaller in it. The colonel was standing at the window, looking out toward the flight line. He didn't turn around immediately when she came in. "Sit down, Captain," he said finally. Sarah sat. I received a phone call this morning from Admiral James Morrison at the Pentagon. You know who Admiral Morrison is? No, sir, I don't believe I do. Admiral Morrison oversees all Army aviation operations across 3,000 military installations. He's one of the most powerful people in Army aviation. And this morning, he called me personally to ask about you. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He said that Major Richardson had mentioned your name, that you were requesting to fly the Apache in tomorrow's demonstration. Admiral Morrison wanted to know what I thought about that idea. Sarah waited. She said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only intelligent response. I told the Admiral that I had concerns, that you hadn't had adequate training time, that the Apache requires a certain level of experience and maturity that comes with time. I told him that I didn't think you were ready. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner. However, Colonel Hartley continued, turning to face her, the Admiral disagreed with me. He said that he wanted to see you fly. He said that he wanted to evaluate you personally, and that's not a request that a colonel gets to refuse when it comes from a 3-star admiral. So here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going to take that Apache into the sky. You're going to fly the demonstration that Major Richardson planned. And you're going to do it in front of Admiral Morrison and a group of very important people. And if you fail, Captain, if you make a single serious mistake, the repercussions are going to extend a lot further than just your career. Sarah felt the weight of what he was saying settle on her shoulders. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. You have one more training flight this morning. Make it count. And Captain, I hope for your sake that you know what you're doing. She left his office and made her way back to the flight line in a daze. Her one last training flight was now more important than any 1,000 hours she had logged before. It wasn't just about preparation anymore. It was about proving that she belonged. Marcus was already doing a pre-flight check on the Apache when she arrived. He looked up at her and immediately seemed to understand that something had changed. Colonel told you about the Admiral? He asked. Sarah nodded. Yeah, I heard about that from one of the crew chiefs. That's pretty intense, Chen. No pressure, right? How much does the Admiral actually understand about flying? Sarah asked. I mean, is he looking for perfection or is he looking for competence? Marcus considered the question while he checked the hydraulic lines. Admiral Morrison is like 300 pounds of expectations wrapped up in a dress uniform, Marcus said. He's looking for pilots who can execute under pressure. He's looking for people who understand that the machine comes first and ego comes second. He's going to test you today. This flight is going to be your evaluation, whether you realize it or not. How do you mean? I mean he's probably going to have someone watching the data feed, recording everything. He's going to want to see exactly how you handle this bird. So you're not just flying for me anymore, Chen. You're flying for the Admiral. You're flying for the entire command structure. You're flying for everyone who's ever doubted whether a woman belongs in the Apache cockpit. Sarah climbed into the back seat and took a breath. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of that, all those eyes, all those expectations, all the proof that was riding on the next 2 hours. Then she pushed it aside. There was no point in thinking about what other people expected. There was only the helicopter. There was only the flight. Let's go, she said. This time, the Apache and Sarah moved as one. It was like the machine had accepted her as a partner, finally. Her hands knew where to go. Her instincts knew what the helicopter needed before the instruments even told her. When she climbed to altitude, it felt like she had always belonged in the sky. Marcus didn't say much. He just watched and took notes. But at one point, when Sarah executed a complex set of maneuvers, climbing, banking, recovering, he let out a low whistle. That was clean, he said, really clean. For the next hour and a half, Sarah proved everything she had worked for. She demonstrated precision landings. She showed aggressive maneuvering capability. She proved that she could handle the weapons systems integration, the fire control computer, the 1,000 different systems that made the Apache a flying instrument of war. When they landed, Marcus was quiet for a long moment before he turned to her. You know what? I think you might actually be able to do this. Coming from Marcus, that was almost like getting a medal. That night, Sarah barely slept. She went through the entire demonstration flight in her head, minute by minute. She visualized every move, every decision, every correction she would make tomorrow. She had already logged her hours. She had already proven herself in training. Tomorrow was just about showing it to the right people. The problem was that she knew on some level that flying perfectly wouldn't be enough. There would be other pilots flying tomorrow too. They would be flying helicopters they had thousands of hours in. They would have the advantage of experience and comfort. Sarah would have the advantage of desperation. At 3 in the morning, she was lying awake in the dark when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Good luck tomorrow, you've got this, MW." It took her a moment to realize it was from Marcus. Marcus Webb, who had been dismissive and condescending since the day she arrived, was wishing her luck. Sarah set the phone down and finally let herself cry, not because she was sad, but because everything she had held in for 3 years, all the frustration, all the doubt, all the pressure, needed to come out. By the time dawn broke, she was ready. The demonstration was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, which meant the morning was a chaos of final preparations. The base was hosting not just Admiral Morrison, but a group of other high-ranking officers. There were civilians too, people from the Department of Defense, politicians, people who made decisions about military budgets and deployments and the lives of soldiers. Sarah had breakfast alone in the officers' cafeteria. She didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to hear words of encouragement that would get stuck in her head, didn't want to experience anyone else's nerves projected onto her. Around noon, she suited up in her flight gear. The weight of the suit was familiar and comforting. The helmet, the harness, the boots, they were like armor. They transformed her into something more than just a woman who had been told she didn't belong. They transformed her into a pilot. The demonstration field was set up on the east side of the base, where a viewing platform had been built for the visitors. Sarah could see the crowd gathering as she made her way to the Apache. Easily 200 people, photographers, military personnel, civilians in business suits. Colonel Hartley was waiting by the helicopter. His expression was unreadable. "Your crew chief has completed all the pre-flight checks," he said. "The bird is ready. How are you?" "I'm ready, sir." "I hope so. Admiral Morrison is up in the observation tower. He's watching this personally. I want you to know that whatever happens today, you've already done something remarkable. You've pushed yourself further than most people ever will." It was the kindest thing he had ever said to her, and it almost made her feel worse because she knew he still didn't believe she could do this. Sarah climbed into the Apache alone. The crew chief guided her through the startup sequence. The engines began to turn over, slowly at first, then faster. The rotors began to move. Slowly, the helicopter came to life. Sarah ran through every pre-flight check. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Then she heard a voice in her headset, the flight operations controller. "Captain Chen, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is calm from the north. All systems are go. Flight time for your demonstration is 12 minutes. Make it count." Sarah pushed the collective and advanced the throttle. The Apache lifted off the ground smoothly, effortlessly. For a moment, she was alone in the sky with this magnificent machine. Then she heard another voice in her headset, a new voice, a voice with the weight of command behind it. "Captain Chen, this is Admiral Morrison. I'm watching you from the tower. Show me what you've got." The Apache responded to Sarah's inputs like it had been waiting for this moment. She climbed to 1,000 feet, the Texas landscape spreading out beneath her like a massive painting. To the north, she could see the viewing area where Admiral Morrison and the other observers were watching. "Admiral Captain Sarah Chen, call sign Falcon, beginning demonstration," she said into her headset. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything about her was steady. She began with the basics, a series of turns and climbs that demonstrated the helicopter's agility. But these weren't just movements. They were a conversation between pilot and machine, a display of precision and control that went beyond the technical requirements of the flight. Then she advanced to something more complex. She demonstrated the Apache's weapon system integration by executing a series of firing simulations. The system displayed firing solutions on her screen, and she executed the targeting sequences perfectly. It wasn't real weaponry. This was a demonstration, after all, but the data showed that every single simulated shot would have found its mark. "Good tracking," Admiral Morrison said over the radio. "Your target acquisition is clean. Keep going." Sarah banked the helicopter hard to the right, pushing it into a steep climb. This was something she hadn't formally trained for, but something she had practiced alone in her mind 1,000 times. She was going to show them not just competence, but mastery. Not just technical skill, but artistry. She executed a series of maneuvers that pushed the Apache to the edge of its performance envelope. Climbing, diving, rolling, recovering. Each movement was precise. Each movement was purposeful. She wasn't showing off. She was demonstrating that she understood this machine at the deepest level. "That's unusual technique," Admiral Morrison said. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" "My father," Sarah said. "He was a Navy pilot. He taught me that flying isn't about following procedures. It's about understanding the relationship between pilot and aircraft." There was a long pause. "Your father's name?" "Thomas Chen, sir. F-18 pilot, First Gulf War." Another pause. "I knew Thomas Chen. Good man, good pilot. This explains some things." Sarah didn't have time to process that statement. She was too focused on executing the next phase of the demonstration. She brought the Apache back to a lower altitude and began demonstrating precision flying, hovering in place, moving sideways, rotating the helicopter while maintaining a stable position. These were techniques that required extraordinary control and confidence. Each maneuver was perfect. Sarah had practiced them in simulation hundreds of times. She had visualized them thousands of times. Her hands knew exactly what to do. "Captain Chen," Admiral Morrison said, "I'm going to ask you to do something that wasn't in the demonstration plan. Are you willing?" Sarah's heart jumped. She had no idea what he was about to ask. "Yes, sir." "There's a navigation point about 10 miles northwest of your current position. Ground coordinates are being sent to your system now. I want you to navigate there using terrain mapping only. No GPS, no external navigation. You'll be using the terrain analysis systems to find the location. Then I want you to execute a precision landing on a 200-foot clearance area. The clearance will be marked with ground beacons. If you come within 50 feet of any obstacle, the test is over." "Do you understand?" This was not a demonstration anymore. This was an evaluation. This was a test of whether Sarah could handle the most advanced systems on the Apache while under extreme pressure. "I understand, sir." Sarah switched over to the terrain mapping system. The Apache had one of the most sophisticated navigation systems ever created. It could map the ground beneath it in real time and compare it to preloaded terrain data. But flying by terrain alone, without GPS, was different from flying with all the electronic aids. It required absolute confidence in the system and absolute confidence in yourself. Sarah studied the terrain map on her screen, 11 miles northwest. She could see the route clearly. She pushed the Apache forward and locked her focus on the terrain display. The next 10 minutes were some of the most intense minutes of her life. She was flying at low altitude, crossing rivers and hills, using nothing but the terrain mapping system to navigate. Her eyes flicked between the screen and the real terrain beneath her. She had to match what she was seeing to what the system was telling her. It was like solving a puzzle at 300 miles per hour. But Sarah had always been good at puzzles. She had always been good at seeing patterns. She had always been good at doing the impossible things because she simply didn't let herself accept that they were impossible. At 10 miles, she could see the ground beacons on her display. They were coming up fast. She reduced speed and began her approach. The clearance area appeared beneath her, a small patch of flat ground surrounded by obstacles. This wasn't the kind of landing field that Apache pilots normally used. This was the kind of terrain that you found in contested areas, in places where the enemy had destroyed the infrastructure, and all you had to work with was what nature gave you. Sarah brought the Apache down smoothly, 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. She could feel the helicopter responding to every microadjustment of the controls. This was flying at its absolute finest, the pilot and the machine moving as one. The Apache touched down on the ground with barely a tremor. Sarah had executed a perfect landing in one of the most difficult conditions possible. For a moment there was complete silence. Then Admiral Morrison's voice came through the headset. "Bring the helicopter back to base. Demonstration is complete." The flight back to Fort Hood felt eternal. Sarah was running on adrenaline and nervous energy. She had done what she came to do. She had shown Admiral Morrison exactly what she was capable of. But she had no idea what he had been thinking. No idea whether it was enough. No idea whether anything she had just done would change anything. She landed the Apache smoothly back on the base and powered down the systems. The rotor blades slowed. The engines grew quiet. For the first time in an hour, Sarah could hear her own breathing. The crew chief opened the canopy, and Sarah climbed out of the helicopter on shaking legs. She pulled off her helmet, and the Texas sun hit her face. Colonel Hartley was waiting for her on the tarmac. Behind him, she could see Major Richardson walking toward them. And behind them, walking slowly across the landing field with an admiral's bearing, was Admiral James Morrison himself. Sarah's stomach turned over. This was it. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen right now. Admiral Morrison was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s. His uniform was perfect. His bearing was perfect. Everything about him communicated the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of being right about important things. He stopped in front of Sarah. "Captain Sarah Chen," he said. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "That was the most technically proficient Apache demonstration I have seen in 3 years, and I have watched hundreds of them." Sarah's brain couldn't quite process the words. "Sir, you heard me correctly, Captain. I want you to understand something. When I was a young pilot, I thought that the only thing that mattered was the hours. I thought that experience was the only teacher that counted. I thought that people who hadn't put in the time couldn't possibly understand what the machine could do. I was wrong about that. Experience matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. What matters is whether you understand the relationship between yourself and the machine. Whether you can feel what it's trying to tell you. Whether you can communicate with it in the language that it understands." The Admiral paused. "Your father understood that. I see where you got it from. And I want to tell you something else, Captain. I don't care whether you're a man or a woman. I don't care what anyone has told you about what you're supposed to be capable of. What I care about is performance. And your performance today was exceptional." Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. It felt like 3 years of held-back tears and rage and determination all finally found their way out. "Thank you, sir," she managed. "I'm also going to tell you that I'm filing a formal report with Colonel Hartley's command structure. That report is going to recommend that you be considered for advanced training opportunities. You have potential that exceeds most of the pilots on this base. I'd hate to see that potential wasted because of someone's outdated views about who belongs in an Apache cockpit." The Admiral looked at Colonel Hartley as he said this last part. The Colonel's face had gone very pale. "Do you have any questions for me, Captain?" the Admiral asked. "No, sir, just, thank you, sir, thank you for giving me the chance." "You gave yourself the chance," Admiral Morrison said. "I just opened a door, you're the one who walked through it." The next few days passed in a blur. The Admiral's visit became the talk of the entire base. Word spread about Sarah's demonstration, about the terrain navigation test, about the formal recommendation that Admiral Morrison had filed. By Monday morning, everything had changed. Sarah was in her office when Colonel Hartley called her in. She expected another lecture, another conversation about her future on the base. What she didn't expect was what actually happened. Colonel Hartley was alone in his office when she arrived. He stood up from his desk when she came in. "Sit down, Captain," he said. Sarah sat. "I received the official report from Admiral Morrison this morning. It was sent to me through command structure, which means my superiors have already read it. They've already made their opinions known." Sarah said nothing. She waited. "I want to apologize," Colonel Hartley said. "I was wrong about you. I let my own assumptions about what a pilot should be dictate my evaluation of you. That was unprofessional and it was unfair. I want you to know that I recognize that now." Sarah blinked. She had not expected this. "I'm recommending you for promotion to Major," Colonel Hartley continued. "I'm also recommending that you be assigned as the primary test pilot for new Apache protocols going forward. If you want it, the position is yours. You've earned it." "I want it, sir," Sarah said. "Good. Welcome to the Apache wing, Captain Chen, or should I say welcome back, because I have a feeling you were always meant to be here. I was just too blind to see it." 3 months later, Sarah was sitting in the same Fort Hood base, but everything about her position had transformed. The Apache that had once been forbidden territory was now her workspace. The pilots who had mocked her were now her junior officers. But success, Sarah was learning, came with complications. She was the first woman to be permanently assigned to an Apache operational wing at Fort Hood. She was also the first woman at Fort Hood to be promoted to major based on aviation performance alone. These were achievements to be proud of, but they also came with a target on her back. There were whispers. People who said Admiral Morrison had made an exception for her. People who suggested that she had somehow manipulated the system. People who implied that her success was a novelty rather than the result of genuine skill. Sarah tried not to listen. She focused on her flying, on her training, on being the best pilot she could possibly be. But it was harder than she expected, because some of the criticism came from places she hadn't anticipated. 2 weeks after her promotion, she was called into Admiral Morrison's office. The Admiral was now on a video call from Washington. He was calling to check on her progress, to see how she was adjusting to her new role. "I wanted to warn you about something," the Admiral said. "Your success is going to threaten people. Some of those threats will be overt, some will be subtle, some will come from places you don't expect. But I want you to know that my recommendation stands. You earned this position, and if anyone questions that, you tell them to talk to me." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "But I want to earn it again every single day. I don't want anyone to be able to say that I'm just coasting on your recommendation." "That's the right attitude," Admiral Morrison said. "And that's exactly why I know you're going to be fine. You're not in this for validation anymore. You're in it because you belong here. That makes all the difference." But the real challenge came from within her own unit. Marcus Webb was still there. He was still a talented pilot, still one of the best that Sarah had ever flown with. But something had shifted between them after the Admiral's visit. Marcus had started to distance himself from Sarah. He would volunteer for different flight schedules. He would eat lunch at different times. When they had to fly together for training purposes, he was professional but cold. One day, Sarah finally confronted him about it. "Marcus, what's going on with you?" "What do you mean?" he asked, not meeting her eyes. "I mean that we used to work well together. Now you won't even look at me. Did I do something wrong?" Marcus set down the flight planning document he had been reviewing and finally looked at her directly. "You did everything right," he said. "That's the problem. You came out of nowhere, you pushed yourself harder than anyone I've ever seen, and you beat me. Not in a competition, but just by being better. And the worst part is, I can't even hate you for it because I know you earned it fair and square." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. "I wasn't trying to beat you, Marcus." "I know, that's what makes it harder. If you had been ambitious, if you had been trying to climb over everyone else, I could dismiss you. But you weren't. You were just trying to be the best version of yourself. And that's worse, because it means that maybe I've been settling. Maybe I've been accepting what I was told about myself instead of pushing for something more." Sarah understood then. Marcus's coldness wasn't really about her. It was about the way her success had become a mirror, reflecting back to him all the things he wasn't doing. All the ways he was settling for less than he was capable of. "You could still do this," Sarah said. "You could push yourself. You're a great pilot, Marcus. You could be extraordinary." "Maybe," he said, "but that would require admitting that I've been wrong about a lot of things, including about you. I'm not sure I'm ready to do that yet." Sarah let it go. She knew that some people would come around and some wouldn't. She knew that her success had opened a door for other women in the Apache program, and she knew that some people would resent her for that opening. But she also knew that she couldn't control anyone else's response to her success. She could only control her own response, her own commitment, her own excellence. 6 months after Admiral Morrison's visit, Sarah was assigned to lead a training mission for a group of younger pilots. One of them was a young woman named Lieutenant Jessica Martinez. Jessica was barely 24, fresh out of flight school, and the first thing she did when she met Sarah was cry. "I just wanted to meet you," Jessica said, wiping her eyes. "I read about the demonstration you did, I saw the official report, and I thought, if you could do that, if you could fight that hard to prove yourself, maybe I could too." Sarah felt the weight of that moment. She understood, suddenly, that her success wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the path that she had created for other women. It was about changing what was possible in a world that had always told them what was impossible. "I'm going to train you," Sarah said to Jessica. "I'm going to push you harder than anyone has ever pushed you before, and I'm going to expect more from you than you've ever expected from yourself. Can you handle that?" "Yes, ma'am," Jessica said. Over the next 3 months, Sarah and Jessica flew together almost daily. Sarah taught her everything she knew about the Apache, not just the technical aspects, but the philosophy of it. How to listen to the machine, how to trust your instincts, how to push yourself past the point where you think you can go. By the end of 3 months, Jessica had logged more than 60 hours in the Apache, and she had become one of the most proficient young pilots on the base. More importantly, she had become a symbol. Other women began to arrive at Fort Hood, requesting assignments to the Apache wing. Some of them washed out, but some of them didn't. Some of them thrived. Sarah started a formal mentorship program. She worked with Colonel Hartley to develop training protocols that focused on technique and performance rather than assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. The protocols were better. The pilots were better. And slowly, quietly, the culture of the base began to shift. 8 months after Admiral Morrison's visit, Sarah received a letter from Colonel Hartley. She was being reassigned. The assignment was to the Army's Advanced Pilot Training Facility in Alabama as the Director of Rotary Wing Instruction. It was a promotion. It was an honor. It was also a vote of confidence that her success at Fort Hood hadn't been an accident, that she had genuine skill that could be applied to training and development across the entire Army aviation system. Sarah read the letter 3 times, not quite believing it. She had come to Fort Hood as a woman who wasn't allowed to fly the Apache. She was leaving as the person who would be teaching the next generation of pilots how to fly it. That night, she called Admiral Morrison. "Did you have something to do with this?" she asked. "Not directly," the Admiral said, "but I made sure your name was in the right conversations. I made sure the right people knew what you had accomplished. The rest was all you." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to teach this level of material to people with more experience than I have." "That's the mark of a good teacher," Admiral Morrison said. "The best teachers are the ones who are still learning. You'll be fine, Sarah, better than fine. You're going to change aviation instruction in this Army. Just like you changed what's possible for women in combat operations, you have a way of opening doors." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her apartment and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had changed in the past year. 12 months ago, she had been an invisible pilot who wasn't allowed to fly. 12 months later, she was being sent across the country to teach others how to be better pilots. It wasn't revenge exactly, but it was justice. It was validation. It was proof that if you worked hard enough, believed in yourself enough, pushed yourself past the point where anyone else thought you could go, you could actually change what was possible. Sarah arrived at the Army's Advanced Pilot Training Facility in Alabama on a humid June morning. The base was larger than Fort Hood, more prestigious, more established. It was the place where the Army sent its most promising pilots to learn advanced techniques and prepare them for command positions. It was also, historically, one of the most male-dominated environments in all of Army aviation. Colonel David Harrison, who ran the facility, met her at the Flight Operations Office. He was a tall, thin man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair, and a manner that suggested he had seen it all and been impressed by very little. "Major Chen," he said, shaking her hand. "Welcome. I have to admit I was skeptical when I heard about your assignment, but Admiral Morrison sent me your file along with his recommendation. It's quite impressive." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "The reason I bring up my skepticism is because I want to be honest with you. This facility has a particular culture. We train the best of the best. We have instructors who have been here for 20 years. They have their methods, and those methods work. I'm asking you to come in and change some of those methods. That's not going to be easy." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because Colonel Hartley sent me some additional information about what happened at Fort Hood. He said that you not only had to overcome external skepticism, you had to overcome institutional skepticism. You had to change minds about what was possible." Sarah had not expected Colonel Hartley to go so far in his recommendation, but she was grateful for it. "I can handle skepticism, sir. I've dealt with worse." "Good, because your first assignment is going to test that. I want you to audit the entire advanced rotary wing curriculum. I want you to observe every class, every training flight, every simulation. And I want you to give me a report on where we can improve. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." What Sarah didn't know was that Colonel Harrison had already seen the writing on the wall. He was a smart man, a forward-thinking man. He understood that the military was going to change whether he liked it or not. The question was whether he was going to manage that change actively or let it happen to him. By assigning Sarah to audit the entire curriculum, he was also sending a message to his faculty. Change was coming, and the person leading that change was a woman who had already proven herself capable of extraordinary things. For the first 3 weeks, Sarah said almost nothing. She attended classes, she observed training flights, She watched instructors work with students. She recorded data. She took notes. She built a comprehensive picture of how the facility trained pilots. What she found was that the curriculum was good. In many ways, it was excellent. The instructors were talented. The materials were well developed. But there was something missing, something intangible that couldn't be captured in a syllabus or a checklist. There was no context for understanding why a pilot needed to learn certain techniques. There was no framework for connecting the technical skills to the larger mission of being a military aviator. And most importantly, there was no room for adaptation. The curriculum was designed to produce pilots who followed procedures. It wasn't designed to produce pilots who understood the relationship between themselves and their aircraft. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks writing her report. She recommended major changes to the curriculum structure. She proposed new training methodologies based on what she had learned from her own experience. She suggested ways to integrate real-world decision-making into the classroom environment. Most radically, she proposed that the facility create a mentorship program where advanced students would work one-on-one with experienced instructors to develop their personal flying philosophy. When she presented the report to Colonel Harrison, he read through it carefully without commenting. When he finished, he set it down on his desk and looked at her over his reading glasses. "This would require changing everything," he said. "Yes, sir, it would. My instructors have been teaching the same way for 15, 20 years. You're asking them to fundamentally change their approach." "I'm asking them to enhance their approach," Sarah corrected. "To add a layer of understanding that will make their students better pilots. The foundation is solid. I'm just asking them to build higher." Colonel Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try it, but we're going to do this carefully. We're going to implement one element at a time. We're going to measure the results, and if it's not working, we're going to adjust. Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable, sir." The first person Sarah approached about implementing the new curriculum was senior instructor Colonel Michael Torres. Colonel Torres had been teaching advanced rotary wing techniques for 18 years. He had trained hundreds of pilots who had gone on to command positions around the world. He was, by any measure, extremely successful at what he did. He was also, she suspected, going to be her biggest obstacle. "Major Chen," Torres said when she came to his office, "I understand you've been observing my classes." "Yes, sir, your instruction is excellent. Your students are learning the technical material at a very high level." "And yet," Torres said, "you've recommended some changes to how I teach." "I've recommended that we add mentorship components to the existing curriculum. I think it could enhance what you're already doing." Torres leaned back in his chair and studied her. "Let me be frank with you, Major. I've heard the story of what happened at Fort Hood. I've heard about how you flew that Apache in front of the Admiral. I've heard that you pushed Colonel Hartley to change his programs. And I'm going to tell you something that nobody else will probably tell you." Sarah waited. "I'm one of the people who believed that women didn't belong in certain positions in the military. I believed that because I had never seen a woman do what you did. But now that I've seen it, I have to reconsider my beliefs. And that's uncomfortable. That's the kind of discomfort that makes people resistant to change." Sarah didn't know what to say to that kind of honesty. "So here's what I'm going to do," Torres continued. "I'm going to read your curriculum recommendation very carefully, and I'm going to think about what you're proposing. And if I'm convinced that it will make my students better pilots, I'm going to implement it. Not because I like change, but because I believe in teaching the best pilots I can. Can you live with that?" "Yes, sir, that's all I'm asking." 2 weeks later, Torres called her back to his office. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her. "About the relationship between the pilot and the machine, about flying being a conversation rather than a procedure. I've been teaching procedures for 18 years. I'm ready to try teaching something deeper." That was the turning point. Once Torres agreed to implement the new mentorship components, the other instructors followed. They weren't all happy about it. Some of them were skeptical. But they all recognized that if Michael Torres thought it was worth trying, it was worth trying. Over the next year, the facility was transformed. Students who went through the new curriculum showed marked improvement in their ability to handle complex scenarios. They were more adaptive. They were more confident. They were better pilots. The results spoke for themselves. By the end of her first year at the facility, Sarah had trained 23 new instructors in the mentorship methodology. She had overseen the creation of a new advanced curriculum, and she had fundamentally changed how the facility approached pilot training. She had also become something she hadn't expected. She had become a symbol, not just of what a woman could do, but of what was possible when you were willing to challenge the old ways of doing things. The letters began arriving in her third month at the facility. Letters from women pilots all over the Army. Letters from Lieutenant Jessica Martinez, who had gone on to earn her own Apache certifications. Letters from young women who said that they had joined the Army because of what Sarah had done. Letters from mothers who said they had told their daughters that they could be anything they wanted to be, and they pointed to Sarah as proof. Sarah saved all the letters. She kept them in a file on her desk. Whenever she felt tired, whenever she felt doubt creeping in, she would read one of those letters and remember why she had fought so hard. 18 months into her assignment, Sarah received a call from Admiral Morrison. "I wanted to be the first to tell you," the Admiral said, "that you're being recommended for a promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. The recommendation is going to be official next week, but I wanted to give you a heads up." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me, thank yourself. You've done everything you set out to do. You proved that you belonged in the Apache cockpit. You earned the respect of your peers, and you've changed the future of pilot training in this Army. That's not something that happens very often." "I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said. "You're right about that," the Admiral said, and there was warmth in his voice. "But I want you to know something. I could give you 10,000 recommendations, and if you didn't have the skill and the drive and the will to succeed, none of it would matter. I opened a door, Sarah, but you're the one who walked through it and made it matter." The promotion ceremony was held at the facility on a crisp October morning. Sarah stood in dress uniform as the insignia was pinned to her collar, the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. She had come from being a pilot who wasn't allowed to fly the Apache to being an officer who was teaching the next generation of Army aviators. Colonel Harrison read the citation. "For exceptional leadership in aviation instruction and for innovative development of advanced rotary wing pilot training protocols that have significantly enhanced military readiness across all Army aviation installations." It was official, it was public, it was real. After the ceremony, Sarah stood on the tarmac looking at the helicopter training field. She could see young pilots going through their paces, executing maneuvers they had practiced hundreds of times. She could see the future of Army aviation taking shape before her eyes. She thought about Colonel Hartley and the way he had looked at her that first day. She thought about Marcus Webb and the moment when he realized that his own limitations were self-imposed. She thought about Admiral Morrison and the strange turn of fate that had brought him to Fort Hood exactly when she needed him. But mostly, she thought about herself, about the young woman who had asked to fly the Apache and had been told no, about the pilot who had decided that no was not the final answer, about the person who had pushed herself past every limit that anyone had ever suggested she had. That person, the person she had become, would never settle for less than her best. That person would never accept someone else's definition of her limitations. That person would always believe that the hard thing, the impossible thing, the thing that everyone said you couldn't do, was worth fighting for. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Torres came to her office as she was packing up for the day. "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing her an envelope. Sarah opened it. It was a letter. It was from one of his students, a young woman named Rachel Chen, no relation to Sarah, but a remarkable coincidence of names. "Dear Colonel Torres," the letter read, "I wanted to tell you that the mentorship component of your class changed everything for me. You taught me not just how to fly the Apache, but why I wanted to fly it. You taught me that being a pilot is about understanding yourself and your relationship with the machine. You taught me to believe in myself even when I was terrified. And I want you to know that I'm going to be spending the rest of my career paying that forward, teaching other pilots what you and Colonel Chen taught me. Thank you for caring enough to change your mind." Sarah looked up at Torres, tears streaming down her face. "That's why I came here," she said. "That's exactly why I came here." "I know," Torres said. "And that's why I finally understood what you were trying to do. You weren't trying to change the curriculum. You were trying to change the culture. You were trying to create a place where the next generation of pilots, men and women, knew that they could be anything they wanted to be, that they weren't limited by what had come before, that they could dream bigger than the people who came before them ever dreamed." "Is that what I did?" Sarah asked. "That's exactly what you did. And you did it not by being loud or aggressive or demanding. You did it by being excellent. You did it by proving that there was a better way. And you did it by being willing to teach other people how to do the same thing." After Tors left, Sarah sat alone in her office and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had accomplished. It wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about proving that she belonged in the Apache cockpit. It was about creating a legacy. It was about opening doors for people she would never meet. It was about changing what was possible. She looked at the file of letters on her desk. She thought about Jessica Martinez flying the Apache with confidence. She thought about Rachel Chen believing in herself. She thought about the young women who would come after them, standing on the shoulders of giants, reaching for dreams that had seemed impossible just a few years before. And Sarah Chen smiled, because she knew with absolute certainty that the best part of her journey wasn't behind her. The best part was still ahead. It would be written not by her, but by all the pilots she would teach, all the barriers she would help break, all the doors she would help open. She had asked to fly the Apache, and they had laughed. But minutes later, the Admiral had declared her the best pilot alive. And now, she would spend the rest of her career making sure that other people got the chance to discover what they were capable of. She would spend the rest of her life opening doors. She would spend the rest of her career proving that the limits people placed on us were almost always smaller than the potential that lived inside us, waiting to be discovered.